When we hear the word Islam, most often simple and stereotypical images pop up in our minds. Prayer, fasting, women in hijabs, mosques. Someone imagines a hot desert, someone else. An oriental bazaar, or even footage from the news where everything is not so calm. But if we set aside everything superficial, something far greater opens up. Islam is not just a religion, it is a vast civilization. A civilization that was born in the deserts of Arabia, but already after 100 years spoke Greek in Damascus, Persian in Bukhara, Coptic in Egypt, and Berber languages. Mecca was an important trading center, but in essence it was a closed society living by its own laws. A strict hierarchy reigned there. Clans dominated. The rich, the poor, the destitute, and slaves were an ordinary phenomenon. Women had almost no rights. Infant mortality was high, and newborn girls were sometimes even buried alive. Such was the harsh reality. And in such a society there appears a man who says, all people are equal before God. What matters is not the tribe, not blood, not wealth, but personal faith, morality, and justice. And he says this out loud, against the nobility, against the established order. Muhammad did not just found a religion. He offered people a new way to live, to think, and to relate to one another. His followers were people from different layers of society. The poor, women, adolescents, free people, people who were seeking meaning and justice. After 20 years from the beginning of this preaching, Islam became not only a faith, but also the foundation of a state. And yet, after 100 years, a world empire stretching from Spain to India. But conquests are only one of the things Islam brought with it. When Europe was still only recovering from the fall of Rome, the Islamic world was already building cities with sewer systems, hospitals, and universities. In Baghdad, in the 1st century of the Hijrah, there worked the House of Wisdom, a huge library and research center where the works of Plato, Aristotle, Galen were translated, and treatises on medicine and mathematics were written. By the way, algebra was invented exactly there. The very word al-Jabr is Arabic. Physicians studied from the multi-volume works of Ibn Sina, in Europe he was known as Avicenna, and optics was studied from the writings of Ibn al-Haytham, who first described the principle of the eye's functioning. While in Europe they were disputing whether anatomy could be studied and copying books by hand in monasteries, in the Islamic world there was paper and mass printing of books. Muslims had borrowed this technology from the Chinese already in the 6th century and quickly spread it. And this is only science. And now imagine the poetry of Sufis, poets who are still translated and quoted today, about love of God, of man, of life. Or look at the architecture. The Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, the Alhambra in Spain, the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. These are not just buildings. They are a visual expression of the ideas of the philosophy of beauty. Islam developed differently in different countries, somewhere absorbing local traditions, somewhere entering into conflict with them. But overall, the Islamic civilization was flexible, multi-layered, and complex. Yes, there were wars. There were mistakes, dogmas, fanaticism. But there were also philosophers who debated whether God can be understood through reason. There were women who led circles for the study of hadiths and corresponded with scholars. There were rulers who built palaces and poor people who wrote poetry. The history of Islam is the history of a living, changing world. It is full of tragedies and triumphs, of the silence of libraries and the noise of markets, of the grandeur of palaces and the humility of the hermit's cell. This is a story about how one idea, about the oneness of God and justice among people, was able to change millions of lives and leave a trace in the history of all humankind. And it is precisely this story that we are telling, not as dogma, not as a political manifesto, but as a human drama full of meaning, paradoxes, searching, and light. The Arabian Peninsula in the 6th, early 7th century is often perceived as some kind of backward, isolated periphery of the civilized world. But this impression is deceptive. Despite the absence of centralized power, of city-states familiar to the ancient world, and of written traditions, Arabia represented a region saturated with internal dynamics and included in the political, religious, and trade system of its time. In the north of the peninsula, near the borders of Byzantium and Persia, there were Arab kingdoms, the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids. The first were under the patronage of Byzantium, the second of Persia. These states were not only a buffer between great empires, but also channels of cultural influence. Christian teaching spread here, intellectual and religious elites were formed, active diplomacy was conducted. The Ghassanids adhered to the Monophysite Christian doctrine, the Lakhmids to the Nestorian one, widespread in Persia, and were closely connected with Zoroastrians. Inside Arabia itself, there were no kings, only tribes united by blood ties and a system of mutual obligations. In society, there were laws of honor, a poetic tradition, and a living memory. The poet in pre-Islamic Arabia played the role of chronicler, ideologue, and often mediator in intertribal conflicts. His word carried weight comparable to the authority of a leader. The largest city of the Hejaz was Mecca. It stood on an important caravan route linking the south of Arabia with the Levant, Iraq, and Persia. The main population of Mecca consisted of the tribal confederation of Quraysh, possessing political influence and economic power. The Quraysh controlled trade and the annual pilgrimage to the Kaaba, the main cult structure of the region. The Kaaba was an ancient sanctuary, venerated by many Arab tribes, and probably its significance went far beyond purely religious function. Around it, a kind of sacred economic zone was formed. During the pilgrimage, there was a ban on armed conflicts, which created unique conditions for trade and communication between tribes. Inside the Kaaba, according to reports from early Islamic sources, there were many idols. According to tradition, their number reached 36, one for each day of the year. Here as well, according to some testimonies, there were also images of Jesus and Mary, which testifies to the cultural openness of Mecca and to its contacts with the Christian world. But the religious map of Arabia in this period was much more diverse than is usually thought. In the south of the peninsula, in Yemen, there existed stable state formations. Thus, the kingdom of Himyar at a certain point adopted Judaism as its state religion. King Yusuf Dunuwas entered history as a ruler who carried out persecutions of Christians. In Najran, an important trade and religious center, these events, which caused an international resonance, left a mark not only in chronicles, but also in the Quran. In the Surah al-Buruj, it is said about people burned for their faith. After the fall of Himyar, influence in the region passed to Ethiopia and then to the Sasanians. Thus, the south of Arabia became an arena of struggle between Christian and Zoroastrian forces. Christianity, although it did not dominate, was noticeable even in the center of the peninsula. Arab Christians, especially Nestorians and Monophysites, inhabited cities such as Yathrib, the future Medina, Tabuk, and Taif. Some were missionaries, others merchants, educated, speakers of other languages. They built churches and took part in the life of the local elite. One of them, according to tradition, the monk Bahira, allegedly recognized in the boy Muhammad a future prophet. How authentic this episode is remains a debated question, but it shows the degree of penetration of Christian thought into the Arab environment. In the north of Arabia, Zoroastrian missionaries were active, especially in the area of Al-Hira and other cities under Persian influence. Zoroastrians brought with them the concept of dualism, the worship of fire, a developed legal system, and rituals of purification. Although they did not acquire mass spread, their presence was felt in the elite strata of society. In a special position were the representatives of the Hanif tradition. The Hanifs were monotheists who had rejected polytheism, but belonged neither to Judaism nor to Christianity. They sought the pure faith of Abraham, which they considered lost. The Hanifs did not form an institutionalized community. Zayd ibn Amr refused to offer sacrifices to idols, and did not eat meat slaughtered without the name of God, and his son Sayyid later became one of the closest companions of Muhammad. Yes, Islamic Arabia was a region at the crossroads of trade routes and religious ideas. It was a territory where constant exchange took place. Caravans brought not only goods, but also thoughts, legends, theological debates. Here lived people who felt new ideas that had not yet taken shape. Against this background, the emergence of Islam was not accidental, but historically natural. It arose in a society where an active search was already underway: ethical, social, spiritual. It was precisely this search that prepared the soil for the religious movement, which in the following decades would change the history of the region, and then of the entire world. This is how Arabia looked on the eve of great changes, fragmented but seething with internal life, a cauldron in which expectations and quests accumulated. It is not surprising that precisely here, precisely then, began the story of a man who offered an answer, and the world changed. The year 570th from the birth of Christ. The city of Mecca. In one of the houses of the Quraysh tribe, in the clan of Hashim, a boy is born. He will be named Muhammad. Worthy. His father Abdullah dies before his birth. His mother Amina bint Wahb raises the child until 6 years of age. First, his grandfather Abd al-Muttalib cares for him, then his uncle Abu Talib. The boy grows up in difficult conditions, but his clan, though not the richest, is respected. Already in early years, Muhammad accompanies caravans on trade journeys, hears the conversations of merchants, memorizes poetry by heart, and learns the tribal codes of honor. He receives no formal education in the literal sense, but the wisdom he acquires is living and practical. By 20 years of age, he is known in the city as an honest and reliable man. People call him Amin, the trustworthy. At 25 years of age, he is invited into the service of an influential merchant woman and widow, Khadija bint Khuwaylid. She entrusts him with accompanying a caravan to Syria. Muhammad performs brilliantly. He returns with profit and without losses. Khadija is impressed. Although she is 15 years older, she offers him marriage. He agrees. Their union lasts about 25 years. It will be not just a family, but a moral and emotional partnership. During this time, they have sons who die in infancy, and daughters, including Fatima. With the years, Muhammad withdraws more and more. He increasingly leaves the city for the cave of Hira, where he spends nights alone, reflecting on the meaning of life and on injustice. The world around troubles him: the trade in idols, the impoverishment of the poor, the abuse of power, social hypocrisy. This is not just religious doubt, it is a deep inner tension. At about 40 years of age, on one of the nights, he experiences an event that he himself will later describe as contact with an external force. It fills him with horror. He rushes home, trembling, asks Khadija to cover him. She does not condemn, but supports him. She says, "You cannot be abandoned by God. You care for the weak, you speak the truth, you respect obligations." She takes him to her relative Waraka ibn Nawfal, an elderly Christian. He says, "This is the same messenger who came to Moses. If only I were alive when your people drive you out." Muhammad is astonished. "They will drive me out? Everyone who comes with what you have brought meets resistance." The revelations continue. They do not resemble philosophical treatises. They are short, powerful texts. They do not discuss the nature of God. They speak about orphans, about truth. This is not a ritual reform, but an ethical revolution. At first, he shares what he hears only with those close to him. Khadija becomes the first to believe, then the young Ali, the freedman Zayd, the friend Abu Bakr. These are different people, of different origins, but united by a common moral sensitivity. The call does not go beyond private conversations, then it becomes public. He stands on the hill of Safar and says, "If I told you that behind the hill there is an army, would you believe?" "Yes," they answer. "Then know, I am a warner." From this moment, the open phase begins. The reaction is at first mixed. They turn away. But when he begins to deny the power of idols, and to say that before God all are equal, hostility begins. The elders of the Quraysh hierarchy offer him a deal. One of the leaders, Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, says, "Do you want wealth? We will make you the richest. Do you want power? You will become a leader. Do you want women? We will choose the best. only stop. In response, Muhammad recites the lines of Revelation and is silent. Utbah returns and says, "This is not sorcery and not poetry. This is something else." Persecutions begin. At first social, they mock Muslims, they do not speak to them. Then economic, they are forbidden to trade. Then physical, slaves are beaten, free men are blackmailed. The Prophet's family endures. Soon the entire clan of Hashim is subjected to a boycott. For several years, they live in a ravine near Mecca, almost without food and trade. Khadija dies, and his uncle Abu Talib dies. Muhammad loses his two main protectors. Some Muslims go to Ethiopia to the Christian king the Negus. He listens to them, compares the Quran with the Gospel, and refuses to hand them over. This is the first international precedent of protection of Muslims, and it happens not in the Arab world, but in Africa. By the 620th year, it becomes clear. Mecca is becoming unfit for the Prophet. He is not only persecuted, his life is in danger. But precisely at this time, he meets pilgrims from the city of Yathrib, the future Medina. They invite him to them. They are looking for a peacemaker, a judge, a leader who can reconcile their warring clans. Muhammad agrees. He is preparing for migration. This event, which will take place in the 622nd year, will become not just a move, it will become the beginning of a new era, the Hijrah. From this moment, Islam ceases to be a private faith and becomes a public order. But more about that a little later. Imagine a hot day in the 622nd year, when Mecca, this lively center of trade and pagan traditions, becomes ever more hostile to the Prophet Muhammad and his followers. The Quraishites, the leaders of the city, hold tightly to their power and to the income brought by pilgrims worshipping many idols around the Kaaba. Muhammad's preaching about the one God, about equality and justice, sounds to them like a challenge undermining their foundations and economic benefit. Years of patience and exhortation bring no fruits. And after the death of his uncle Abu Talib, who, despite his unbelief in Islam, protected his nephew by the laws of the clan, and of his wife Khadija, his first follower and moral support, Muhammad's position becomes especially vulnerable. The Quraishites increase the pressure, forbid trade with the Muslims, expel them from society, and some are even subjected to physical torture. At this moment from Yathrib, a city 300 kilometers to the north, which later will be called Medina, comes an unexpected proposal. Two local tribes, Aws and Khazraj, who for decades had been fighting each other over land, power, and old grievances, learn about Muhammad through his preaching and meetings on trade routes. They see in him not just a preacher, but a man capable of putting an end to their conflicts, and, having accepted Islam, invite him to move to them as a leader and arbiter. Thus begins the Hijrah, an event which will become a turning point in the history of Islam. It is not just a move, but a carefully planned escape full of tension and danger. The Quraishites, having learned of the intentions of the Muslims, act decisively. They announce a reward for Muhammad's head, and begin to watch his every step. The Muslims leave Mecca gradually, in small groups, so as not to attract attention. Some leave under the guise of merchants, some under the cover of night, leaving behind their houses, property, and accustomed life. Muhammad himself delays until the last to make sure that the majority of his supporters are safe. Finally, he sets out together with Abu Bakr, his closest companion. They choose not the direct road, but a roundabout route through the desert to throw the pursuers off the trail. On the way they hide in the cave of Thar, a small mountain cleft a few kilometers from Mecca. The Quraishites, armed and full of determination, reach the very entrance of the cave. According to tradition, at this moment something astonishing happens. A spider in only a few hours weaves a thick web at the entrance, and pigeons build a nest nearby, creating the impression that the cave has long been empty. The pursuers, seeing this, decide not to waste time on inspection and go further. After 3 days, having made sure that the danger has passed, Muhammad and Abu Bakr continue their way. After several days of difficult crossing of the desert, avoiding the main roads, and relying on the help of guides, they arrive in Medina on the 24th of September. This day becomes the beginning of the Islamic calendar, a new era for Muslims. In Medina, Muhammad is met with a warm welcome. The inhabitants of Yathrib, especially those who have already accepted Islam, see in him not only a spiritual leader, but also a man who can unite their fragmented society. The first thing he does is lay the foundation of a mosque. The construction goes quickly. The Muslims, migrants from Mecca, and the locals work together, building a simple structure of clay and palm branches. This mosque becomes not only a place for prayer, but also the center of all community life. Here, they gather for discussions, resolve disputes, and plan the future. Muhammad strives to unite the migrants with the local inhabitants who have accepted Islam. He introduces a system of brotherhood. To each migrant, a brother from among the Medinans is assigned. For example, one Ansar divides his house in half, giving one half to a Haji. Another brings part of his harvest or his livestock. Thus, kindness and mutual help erase boundaries, and people become brothers in faith. But life in Medina does not immediately become calm. The Meccan Qurayshites are not going to leave the Muslims in peace. They see in their escape a challenge to their power and begin to prepare for military actions. In Medina itself, not everything is smooth either. Large Jewish tribes live here, Nadir and Banu Qurayza, who engage in trade, crafts, and agriculture. They at first observe the new leader with interest, but not all are ready to accept him as their prophet. In addition, there appear hypocrites, a group of people who outwardly accept Islam to preserve their influence, but inwardly remain loyal to old traditions and wait for a convenient moment to act against Muhammad. To order life in this complex society, he composes the Constitution of Medina, or Sahifa. This document, written soon after arrival, becomes the first treaty in history which unites all the inhabitants of the city, Muslims, Jews, and even the remaining pagans, into one political community called the Ummah. It spells out clear rules. Each group lives according to its own customs, but all are obliged to defend Medina from external enemies and to resolve disputes through Muhammad as the supreme judge. If someone from the inhabitants attacks another, all must rise against the aggressor. The Jews, for example, are obliged not to help the enemies of the Muslims, and the Muslims to respect their rights. This was a step toward creating a society where loyalty was built not on blood ties, but on common consent and responsibility. Muhammad governs Medina, combining the spiritual role with practical leadership. He does not sit aside, but actively participates in the life of the community. For example, he often gathers his companions for council, or shura, to discuss important questions. Before the Battle of Uhud, in the 625th year, he asks the opinion of his people, to stay in the city, or to go out to meet the enemy. The majority insist on going out beyond the walls. And although he himself leans toward defense, he agrees. The battle ends in defeat, but Muhammad does not blame those who insisted on their opinion, but accepts the lesson. His approach to justice is also noteworthy. Once a young man who had stolen food is brought to him. Instead of immediately punishing him, he asks, "Why did you do this?" Learning that the man was starving, Muhammad orders that he be fed, and that work be found for him, so that he can earn honestly. This shows that for him, the law is not simply punishment, but a way to correct the person and society. Relations with the Jewish tribes develop with difficulty. Initially, they agree to the constitution, hoping that he will become their ally, or even a prophet in the spirit of Jewish traditions. But in the 624th year, he changes the direction of prayer, the Qibla, from Jerusalem to Mecca. This becomes for them a sign that Islam is a separate path. Tension increases. Banu Qaynuqa, the tribe of jewelers, enters into conflict with the Muslims. One of them insulted a Muslim woman, which led to a fight and death. Muhammad demands observance of the treaty, but the tribe refuses to submit. And in the 624th year, after a short siege, they are expelled from Medina. Banu Nadir, farmers and owners of palm groves, fall under suspicion. In the 625th year, they are accused of conspiring with the enemies. After the siege of their fortress, they too leave the city, going north. The most severe case happens with Banu Qurayza in the 627th year. After the Battle of the Trench, the Meccans and their allies besiege Medina, and Banu Qurayza, despite the treaty, begin negotiations with the enemy. When the siege collapses, they are accused of treachery. Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh pronounces the decision. The men are executed, and the women and children are turned into slavery. This harsh punishment remains one of the most disputed pages of history. With other tribes, Muhammad acts differently. With some, he concludes alliances. With others, he fights. The Battle of Badr in the 624th year, where the Muslims with small forces win, becomes a turning point. It strengthens his authority and attracts new supporters. His model of governance changes everything. The Ummah is built on faith, not on kinship. Zakat, obligatory almsgiving, helps the poor. The Constitution introduces the concept of law for all. Even slaves, like Bilal ibn Rabah, a former Ethiopian captive, become respected members of society. He, for example, is the first to call to prayer with his powerful voice. Once a Jewish leader asks, "If you are a prophet, why are you not like Moses with his miracles?" Muhammad answers, "Every prophet is sent for his time. I am a mercy for all peoples." When a noble woman from the Qurayshites steals and asks for clemency, he says, "The law is one, even if you were my daughter Fatima." And before the Battle of the Trench, when the Persian Sultan suggests digging a trench around the city, an idea foreign to Arabian traditions, Muhammad not only agrees, but also himself takes up the spade, working alongside the others. Thus, from the Hijrah and the first years in Medina is born a community where faith, justice, and readiness for cooperation create the foundation for a new order. Imagine the tense atmosphere in Medina, where the young Muslim community, having settled after the Hijrah in the 622nd year, faces growing threats from outside and inner unrest. The Prophet Muhammad has united the Muhajirun and the Ansar into a single ummah, and now concentrates efforts on ensuring its survival in the face of the relentless enmity of the Meccan Qurayshites and the complex network of tribal alliances. In the following years, unfolds a series of fateful battles and diplomatic steps: Badr, Uhud, Khandaq, and finally, the conquest of Mecca. Each of these events demonstrates the combination of strategy, steadfastness, and approach to leadership which distinguished him from the leaders of that time. These episodes, together with outstanding diplomatic efforts, including letters to the rulers of distant lands, reveal not only military mastery, but also aspiration to broader horizons. The first major clash takes place in the 624th year at the Wells of Badr, a small oasis on the trade route. The Meccans, learning of a Muslim caravan under the command of Abu Sufyan, gather people to intercept it and strike at Muhammad's growing influence. He, having gathered only 313 fighters, many of whom are poorly armed, decides to meet the enemy despite the numerical superiority of the opponent. The battle begins with traditional duels where the Muslims, including Ali and Hamza, prevail. Then follows a swift advance. The key becomes the use of the terrain. The narrow passage at the wells limits the maneuver of the Meccans, and the cohesion and faith of the Muslims overturn the course of the fight. The result, 70 enemies killed, the same number taken prisoner, including noble Qurayshites. The victory not only brings spoils, but also strengthens Muhammad's authority, showing that his strategy rests on the superiority of spirit, not on brute force. A year later, in the 625th year, the Meccans, eager for revenge, gather 3,000 warriors and march on Medina. The Battle of Uhud unfolds at the foot of the mountain of the same name. Muhammad, with 700 fighters, occupies a defensive position, placing archers on a hill. The fight begins successfully. The Muslims repel attacks, but the turning point comes when the archers, carried away by pursuit of the retreating enemy, leave their post. Khalid ibn Walid, then still a warrior of the Qurayshites, uses this error, outflanks and strikes. The Muslims lose 70 people, including Hamza, and Muhammad himself is wounded. The defeat teaches him flexibility. He does not execute the guilty, but rebuilds the tactics, emphasizing the importance of unity and obedience. In the 627th year, the Meccans, having united with tribes into an army of 10,000 men, besiege Medina. The Battle of Kondak, or the Trench, is named so because of the idea of the Persian Salman to dig a trench around the city, unusual for Arabian warfare. 3 weeks of siege, exhausting wind and division in their alliance force them to retreat. Muhammad wins without direct battle, relying on preparation and patience. The culmination comes in the 630th year, with the conquest of Mecca. After 2 years of truce under the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, he enters without bloodshed, declaring amnesty. "Today is the day of mercy, and not of revenge," he says, destroying the idols of the Kaaba and turning Mecca into the center of Islam. His strategy is not only military skill, but also the ability to wait. He wins because he sees farther than momentary clashes. His faith in people and their potential, reinforced by shura, consultation with the community, distinguishes him from leaders who rely on fear and coercion. Unlike them, he builds loyalty through trust and forgiveness, as in the case of Abu Sufyan, a former enemy accepted into Islam. Diplomacy plays no lesser role. In the 628th year, he sends letters to rulers. The Persian Shah Khosrow II, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, the Negus of Abyssinia, the ruler of Egypt Muqawqis. In them he writes, "Accept Islam, and you will be safe. God will reward you twice." Khosrow tears the letter. Heraclius ponders, but does not respond, and the Negus sends gifts. These messages, though not immediately successful, show his farsightedness. He thinks in the categories of empires. Thus, for example, at Badr the captive Umair ibn Wahb, who had planned to kill Muhammad, receives pardon and becomes a Muslim. At Kondak the spy Nuaym ibn Masud sows discord among the enemies, outwitting them. These details, from the trench to mercy in Mecca, paint the image of a leader whose power in combining faith, reason, and humanity changed the course of history. A tense atmosphere reigns in Medina in the last years of the life of the Prophet Muhammad, when Islam, having strengthened its position after the conquest of Mecca in the 633rd year, spreads rapidly across the Arabian Peninsula, embracing ever-new tribes and territories with unprecedented speed. By this time, he is no longer the young and full-of-strength preacher who 10 years earlier secretly left Mecca under the cover of night. His health begins to fail. His hair turns gray. His gait becomes slower, but his will and clarity of mind remain unsurpassed. He continues to govern the Ummah, combining the roles of spiritual mentor, supreme judge, and military leader despite physical weakness. These years, from the 630th to the 632nd, become a period of active consolidation of power and faith. He sends military expeditions to subdue or bring to Islam the rebellious tribes, such as the Bedouins and the Hawazin, or the inhabitants of Taif who had earlier resisted. At the same time, he receives delegations from the most different corners of Arabia, from northern to eastern oases, whose representatives come to Medina to pledge allegiance and accept the new religion, often bringing with them gifts, livestock, or oaths of peace. Among these meetings stands out the visit of Christians from Najran, with whom Muhammad holds long conversations about faith, offering them to remain with their own teaching, but under the protection of the Islamic State, which shows his readiness for dialogue even with those of another religion. An important event becomes the farewell pilgrimage, Hajj al-Wada, in March of the 632nd year. Muhammad, sensing the near end, decides to lead this journey, knowing that it may be his last. He leads thousands of Muslims, more than 10,000 people, from Medina to Mecca. This is his first full pilgrimage after the return of the city in the 630th year, and he uses it to establish the rites of Hajj that will become the foundation for future generations. On the plain of Arafat, surrounded by a sea of people, he climbs the hill and delivers his farewell sermon on the 10th day of the month of Dhu al-Hijjah. His voice, though weakened, resounds over the crowd thanks to companions repeating after him, "O people, listen to me carefully, for I do not know whether I will meet you again after this year," he begins, calling for unity, justice, and equality before God. There is no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab, of a white over a black, except in piety and righteousness, he says, emphasizing that former tribal and racial differences must disappear in Islam. He forbids riba, abolishes the custom of blood vengeance inherited from pagan times, and especially insists on respect for the rights of women. Fear God concerning women. They are your helpers, he instructs. Concluding the speech, he asks, "Will you convey this message to those who are not present here?" And the crowd answers with a loud, "Yes." Then he, lifting his gaze to the sky, says, "Be witness," as if summing up his mission before eternity. After the Hajj, he returns to Medina, but soon his condition worsens. A fever, beginning as a slight malaise, intensifies. He spends the last weeks in the house of his wife Aisha, the daughter of Abu Bakr, who cares for him with tenderness and anxiety. His body can no longer rise, but he continues to give instructions. His voice becomes a weak whisper. He asks for ink and parchment to write something important, but the companions, fearing for his state, do not dare to do it, which later causes disputes about his intentions. In the last days, he says, "Guard the prayer and those under your care," addressing those around him. On the 8th of June of the 632nd year, at the age of 63 years, Muhammad departs from life. His head rests on the knees of Aisha. She later recounted, he died with a slight smile, as if he had seen angels or the gardens of paradise. This moment, quiet and almost imperceptible, shakes the community. The death of the Prophet causes turmoil. Many refuse to believe that their leader, their link with the divine, has gone. Abu Bakr, maintaining composure, comes out to the people gathered at the house of Aisha and says, "Whoever worshipped Muhammad, let him know that Muhammad is dead. Whoever worships God, let him know that God is alive and does not die." A verse from the Quran brings them back to reality. Umar snatches a sword and shouts, "The Prophet has not died. He has ascended as Jesus did. I will strike down anyone who says otherwise." He has to be restrained and calmed until he accepts the truth. Chaos threatens to engulf the community, but Abu Bakr takes leadership into his own hands. The question of succession. The Prophet left no clear instruction about who should lead the Ummah after him. He did not name an heir. This causes bewilderment and disagreements. The Ansar, the helpers from Medina, gather in the Saqifa of Banu Sa'idah, the covered courtyard of one of the local clans, to choose a leader from among themselves. They fear that the Meccan Muhajirun, as earlier followers, will take power for themselves. The Muhajirun, including Abu Bakr, Umar, and Abu Ubaidah, had been with the Prophet from the first days in Mecca. Debates heat up, voices turn into shouts. Umar later recalled, "We almost reached for weapons." Oh, but Abu Bakr, known for his calmness and wisdom, offers himself as a compromise. He is supported, though not everyone is satisfied. Some, especially the supporters of Ali, the cousin and son-in-law of Muhammad, believe that power by right of blood should have passed to him. This dispute, though suppressed at that moment, leaves a crack which later turns into the loss of a leader. This is the end of an era of direct divine guidance. The community, accustomed to his presence, his voice, his decisions, finds itself faced with the need to carry his legacy on its own. It is at once a loss and a challenge, to preserve unity and faith without the Prophet among them. Interesting details complete the picture. During his illness, Muhammad ordered Abu Bakr to lead the prayer in his place, something many later considered a sign of succession, although he himself did not confirm it in words. Unexpected turns out to be the place of his burial. He is buried right in the room of Aisha, there where he died, without a solemn procession, simply wrapped in 3 white pieces of cloth as he had bequeathed. On the day of his death, some in Medina claimed they had seen an eclipse of the sun, although historians and astronomers later proved that no such event occurred. For the companions, this became a symbol, as if nature mourned his departure. Another story. Before his death, Muhammad freed all his slaves, including the Ethiopian Maria, the mother of his deceased son Ibrahim, and gave his modest possessions, a spear and a cloak, to to the community, renouncing personal wealth. The final years of Muhammad, from the majestic farewell sermon to the quiet passing in the house of Aisha, paint the portrait of a man who completed his mission with dignity, leaving the Ummah facing a new path full of difficulties, but also of hope for the future which he foresaw and prepared. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad, in the year 632, the reins of leadership of the Muslim community passed to the four righteous caliphs, known as Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali, whose rule, covering the period from 632 to 661, becomes an era of rapid expansion of Islam, and at the same time, a period of internal conflicts, leaving a mark in history as a time of righteousness and as the beginning of the division of the Muslim world. The first Caliph Abu Bakr rules only 2 years, from 632 to 634, facing immediate trials when many Arabian tribes after the death of Muhammad refused to pay zakat, considering their loyalty a personal oath to the Prophet rather than to the state, which leads to the Ridda Wars that threaten the disintegration of the Ummah. He acts decisively, gathering an army under the command of Khalid ibn al-Walid and suppressing the rebellion, including the battle at Al-Imama and campaigns on the fringes of Arabia, introducing the main reform, the centralized collection of zakat directed to the needs of the poor and the army, as well as the first external campaigns against Byzantium and the Sasanians, which lay the foundation for future conquests. His system of governance remains simple. He rules from Medina, relying on the Council of Companions, the Shura, and maintaining personal modesty. Moreover, a little-known fact states that Abu Bakr himself took part in gathering intelligence before the battle at Al-Imama, risking his life and showing his dedication to the cause. Next comes Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second caliph, who ruled from 634 to 644, whose decade is marked by the greatest territorial growth, when the Muslims under his leadership defeat Byzantium in Syria and Egypt, as well as the Sasanians in Iraq and Persia, beginning with the battle at Yarmouk in 636 and continuing to the fall of Alexandria in 641. Umar introduces key reforms. He creates the Diwan, the system for distributing the revenues from conquests where warriors and the community receive a share. He establishes the posts of governors in Iraq to administer the provinces while retaining control from Medina, and his tax system includes kharaj for non-Muslims and zakat for Muslims, supplementing the recording of Islam from the Hijra. Governance under him becomes more structured. The treasury, Bayt al-Mal, and the courts appear. An interesting detail from his life: Umar personally walked the streets of Medina at night, checking on the welfare of the people. One day, while bringing food to a hungry family, which demonstrates his care for his subjects, his rule ends with his assassination by a slave dissatisfied with taxes. The third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, rules from 644 to 656, continuing the expansion as Islam reaches North Africa and Central Asia, defeating the Byzantine fleet and seizing Cyprus. Yet his era is overshadowed by internal contradictions linked to his style of governance. He undertakes a most important reform, the standardization of the Quran, creating a unified text under the direction of Zayd ibn Thabit to eliminate discrepancies. However, he appoints relatives from the Umayyad clan to key posts, which is perceived as nepotism and provokes resentment over inequality in wealth distribution. Despite his centralized system of governance, an interesting fact is that Uthman was so wealthy that already during Muhammad's lifetime, he donated hundreds of camels to the army before the Battle of Tabuk, but his generosity was later forgotten against the backdrop of accusations that culminated in rebellion, and in 656 insurgents from Egypt and Iraq kill him in his own house. The fourth caliph, Ali ibn Abi Talib, rules from 656 to 661. He assumes power amid chaos and tries to restore justice, dismissing Uthman's governors and demanding trial for his killers, which meets resistance and weakens the system of governance as provinces begin to act independently. His reforms focus on equality and the fight against corruption, but face opposition, leading to the first civil war, the Fitna, which erupts in 656 after Uthman's murder. When part of the companions, including Aisha, Talha, and Zubair, demand retribution, and Muawiyah, governor of Syria and relative of Uthman, refuses to pledge allegiance to Ali. The Battle of Siffin in 657 between Ali and Muawiyah ends in arbitration, after which part of Ali's supporters reject him for compromise and kill him in 661, ending the fitna that arose from disputes over power and justice, over who has the right to judge and to rule. The ideas of division into Sunnis and Shiites take shape during this period. The Shiites assert that the caliphate must belong to Muhammad's family and hold spiritual status, whereas the Sunnis recognize the community's choice, the Shura, as the legitimate path. A little-known fact is that Ali once refused to execute a prisoner for insult, saying, "I will not become like those whom we condemn," demonstrating mercy even in the midst of war. The shift in viewpoints leads from the Prophet's charisma to an institutional state where Abu Bakr saves the community's unity, Umar builds an empire, Uthman secures the text of faith but sows discord, and Ali strives for ideals but encounters the reality of political and social contradictions. The fitna is not merely a struggle for power, but a question of how Islam should exist without the Prophet. The split between Sunnis and Shiites is the outcome of different visions of legitimacy, where Sunnis choose stability through communal consensus and Shiites uphold the sanctity of Muhammad's lineage. These processes, begun in the 7th century, continue to shape the Islamic world to this day. After the end of the rule of the 4 rightly guided caliphs in 661, power in the world passes to the Umayyad Caliphate, which lasts from 661 to 751. It becomes the first hereditary ruling house in the history of Islam and transforms the young religion into a true empire stretching from Medina to a complex state structure centered in Damascus. Here, the Arab elite asserts its dominance, but also faces internal challenges that define its rise and fall. The Umayyads, led by Muawiyah ibn Abu Sufyan, come to power after victory over Ali during the first fitna. Their rule opens a new chapter in Islamic history, marked by ambitious expansion, cultural flourishing, and the first signs of systemic discontent. Let us begin with how Islam becomes an empire. After consolidating power in 661, Muawiyah moves the capital from Medina to Damascus, strategically located at the center of the conquered Syrian lands. This allows efficient administration of vast territories and the use of Byzantine administrative experience. He creates a centralized system of governance, relying on Arab commanders and local elites, while preserving many elements of conquered cultures such as Greek bureaucracy and Persian traditions. This synthesis helps the Umayyads turn Islam from a religious movement into a political force capable of competing with the great empires of the time, such as Byzantium and the Sassanids. A key instrument of this transformation becomes the policy of Arabization. It consists of spreading the Arabic language and culture as a means of uniting a diverse population. Arabic becomes the language of administration, the courts, and religion, displacing Greek and Persian in official affairs. However, local languages such as Coptic or Aramaic remain in everyday use. The Umayyads actively encourage non-Muslims to embrace Islam, but retain the jizya, the tax on non-believers, which brings significant revenue. Arabization does not mean total destruction of local traditions. Rather, it overlays an Arab layer atop existing cultures in architecture and administration. The territorial conquests of the Umayyads are striking in scale. In less than 1 century, they extend the borders of the caliphate to unprecedented limits. By the beginning of the 8th century, their domains include the entire Middle East, North Africa, as far as the Maghreb, much of the Iberian Peninsula, known as Al-Andalus, and the lands of Central Asia up to the River Indus. Important milestones include the capture of Jerusalem in 637 under Umar, its transition to full Umayyad control, the conquest of Egypt consolidating their power in Africa, and the Battle of Talas in 751 against Tong China, opening the way to trade and cultural exchange with the East. These successes are secured by an army composed mainly of Arab tribes and skillful use of the navy inherited from the Byzantines. Yet such rapid expansion breeds discontent, especially among the Mawali, non-Arab Muslims who have embraced Islam but remain in a second-class status. The Mawali form a significant part of the populations of conquered territories such as Persia and Egypt. They pay the same taxes as non-Muslims despite their faith, which creates a sense of injustice. The Umayyads are reluctant to grant them equal rights with Arabs, maintaining privileges for descendants of the first Muslims. This leads to growing tension, especially in the eastern provinces, where the Mawali become the driving force of anti-Umayyad uprisings that promise equality. The architecture and culture of the Umayyads reflect their imperial status and synthesis of traditions. One of the symbols of their power is the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, built in 691 under Abd al-Malik. This structure with its golden dome, adorned with Byzantine-style mosaics, demonstrates not only religious significance, but also political might, affirming Islam on the Holy Land. In Damascus, the Great Umayyad Mosque rises in 706. Its courtyards, columns, and minarets combine elements of Roman temples and Arab aesthetics, becoming a center of cultural life. The symbolism of power appears in coinage. The Umayyads are the first to mint their own money with Arabic inscriptions instead of Byzantine and Sassanid images, underscoring independence. Culture thrives thanks to the translation of Greek and Persian texts, the development of poetry, for example the love verses of Akht Talia, and science, although this flourishing is often attributed to the Abbasids. A rare fact, the Umayyads built a network of roads and caravanserais, such as Qasr al-Hayr in Syria, to support trade and military campaigns. This is rarely mentioned, but shows their contribution to infrastructure. Another example is that Caliph al-Walid I in 711 ordered the construction of a hospital in Damascus, one of the first in the Islamic world, where the poor were treated for free, including Christians and Jews. This underscores their pragmatism and tolerance despite discontent. New religious disputes and the extravagance of later caliphs, such as Yazid II, weakened the caliphate. In 750, the Abbasids, relying on the eastern provinces and supporters from among the Mawali, overthrow the Umayyads at the Battle of Zab, annihilating the dynasty except for one survivor, Arachna. This is an era of greatness and contradictions. It turns Islam into an empire, but its obstinate policies and social fissures predetermine its collapse, leaving a rich legacy in culture, architecture, and governance that continues to influence the Islamic world. After the fall of the Umayyad Caliphate in 750, power passes to the Abbasid caliphs, who will rule from 750 to 1258. This epoch, spanning more than 5 centuries, becomes the golden age of Islamic civilization. A time of scientific, cultural, and intellectual revolution when the Islamic world not only preserves the heritage of ancient traditions, but also enriches it, creating a powerful center of knowledge. The Abbasids, rising on the wave of Mawali discontent and supported by the eastern provinces, moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad, founded in 762 by Caliph al-Mansur on the banks of the Tigris. This city becomes a crossroads of cultures, trade, and ideas. Their rule marks a shift from the rigid policies of the Umayyads to a more inclusive model in which Persians, Turks, and other peoples play key roles. Let us begin with the scientific and intellectual revolution, whose heart becomes the House of Wisdom, Bayt al-Hikmah, founded in Baghdad under Caliph Harun al-Rashid at the end of the 8th century, and reaching its height under his son al-Mamun in the 9th century. This is not merely a library, but a center of research, translation, and debate where scholars of different faiths and cultures gather. The House of Wisdom becomes a symbol of the Islamic world's openness to knowledge. Here works of Aristotle, Plato, Hippocrates, Euclid, and Ptolemy are translated from Greek into Arabic, preserving the ancient heritage lost in Europe. The greatest figures of this era are Al-Khwarizmi, father of algebra, who gave his name to the algorithm, and Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, whose Canon of Medicine remains an authoritative text until the 10th century. Al-Khwarizmi, working in the House of Wisdom, introduces Indian numerals, including 0, into Arabic mathematics, revolutionizing calculation. Ibn Sina synthesizes Greek philosophy with Islamic theology, creating encyclopedic works on medicine and metaphysics. Translators such as Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Christian from Baghdad, play no less important a role. He translates hundreds of texts by Hippocrates and Galen, adapting them for the Arabic world with exceptional precision. Interaction with Greek, Indian, and Persian tradition underlies this revolution. The Abbasids inherit astronomy and mathematics from India, for example trigonometry developed by al-Battani, philosophy and logic from Greece, and the Persian tradition brings administrative experience and literary wealth, as in 1001 Nights. This cultural synthesis produces original achievements. Al-Kindi, the first Arab philosopher, joins the ancient heritage with Islamic thought. Al-Farabi writes treatises on the ideal state inspired by Plato. The internal policy of the Abbasids evolves from strong centralization to gradual decentralization. Early caliphs, such as Harun al-Rashid, ruling from 786 to 809, strengthened power through a developed bureaucracy and an army including Persian and Turkic warriors. Yet, by the 9th century, the caliphate faces crises such as the Zanj rebellion and the growing influence of Turkish guards who by the 10th century begin dictating their will to the caliphs. Religious debates become another field of tension. The Mutakallimun, rationalist theologians, argue about the nature of the Quran and free will. The Mutazilites under al-Mamun in 827 declare that the Quran was created in time and is not eternal, provoking resistance from Sunnis defending traditionalism. This struggle peaks in the Mihna, the Inquisition. Ahmad ibn Hanbal is forced to accept Mutazilite views, but Sunni consensus ultimately prevails. Examples of the era's complexity are striking. Caliph al-Mutasim in 836 builds a new capital, Samarra, to escape Baghdad's intrigues. Its palace with painted walls and a huge throne hall still impresses archaeologists. A rare fact, astronomer al-Battani calculates the length of the year with an accuracy of 2 minutes, surpassing European measurements by centuries. Another example, poet Abu Nuwas, living under Harun al-Rashid, writes verses about wine and love, defying strict norms but remaining a favorite at court, showing the era's thirst for creativity. The caliphate loses political power due to fragmentation. The Seljuks seize Baghdad in 1055, limiting the caliphs to a religious role. In 1258, the Mongols under Hulagu destroy Baghdad, bringing the dynasty to an end. This era, rich in knowledge and contradictions, leaves a legacy in Europe and shapes Islamic identity. Its complexity, the weaving of science, faith, and power, makes it a unique chapter in human history. After more than 5 centuries of Abbasid prosperity, its end comes in 1258, when the Mongol invasion under Hulagu, grandson of Genghis Khan, destroys Baghdad. This event, known as the Fall of Baghdad, becomes a turning point for the Islamic world. It marks the end of the Golden Age and the beginning of a period of fragmentation, chaos, and transformation. The Mongols, capturing the city after a siege, destroy its cultural and intellectual centers, including the House of Wisdom. They burn libraries and kill tens of thousands of residents, including Caliph al-Mustasim, who, according to legend, is wrapped in a carpet and trampled by horses to avoid spilling royal blood on the ground. The consequences of this destruction prove deep and multifaceted. The Islamic world, once united under Abbasid rule, loses its political and cultural center, giving way to regionalization and the rise of new regional powers. Let us see what happens next. The fall of Baghdad does not mean the end of Islam as a religion or civilization. However, it sharply weakens the caliphate as an institution. The Abbasids survive nominally in Cairo under the patronage of the Mamluks until 1517, but their role becomes purely symbolic. The Islamic world fragments into numerous independent states, each adapting to new conditions. The Mongols leave behind devastated lands, but also open the way for new dynasties and cultural shifts. Among the regional powers emerging ahead stand the Mamluks in Egypt and Syria. They become the bulwark of resistance. Their key victory occurs at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260 under Sultan Qutuz and his commander Baybars. This victory halts the Mongols' advance westward and strengthens Mamluk power, making Cairo the new center of Islamic culture. In Iran, the Mongol invasion leads to the founding of the Ilkhanid state. Over time, they adopt Islam, especially under Ghazan Khan at the end of the 13th century, which helps restore cultural life. The Persian tradition, including the poetry of Sa'adi and Rumi, begins to flourish under their patronage. In India, the Delhi Sultanate arises, founded back in 1206 by Qutb al-Din Aibak. It consolidates after the Mongol raids thanks to sultans such as Ala al-Din Khalji, who in the early 14th century repels Mongol attacks and expands power, laying the foundation for Islamic culture in the region. In the Maghreb, far from Mongol devastation, the Hafsid dynasty in Tunisia maintains independence. They support Islamic scholarship, becoming heirs to the Andalusian tradition after the decline of Al-Andalus. Sufism in this period plays a decisive role in preserving and transforming Islam after the fall of Baghdad. When the political structure collapses, Sufi orders such as the Naqshbandiya and the Qadiriyya become spiritual havens. They help maintain Islamic identity among ordinary people. The great poet Jalal al-Din Rumi, living in the 13th century, through his mystical poems in the Masnavi, inspires millions. His teaching, based in Konya, spreads through the Mevlevi order, known for the whirling dervishes. Sufi sheikhs, such as Ibn Arabi from Andalusia, developed the concept of the unity of being, influencing philosophy and theology. Cultural shifts manifest in new forms of art and literature. For example, in Iran, miniatures illustrating poems become popular under the Ilkhanids. A rare fact, after the fall of Baghdad scholar Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, who survived under the Mongols, establishes an observatory in Maraga, preserving astronomical knowledge. Another example, Baibars, himself a former slave, builds mosques and schools in Cairo, including the Al-Azhar Mosque, which becomes a symbol of revival. The Mongol invasion and the fall of Baghdad destroy the old order, but they also open an era of regional diversity. The Islamic world adapts through new dynasties, Sufism, and cultural renewal. This transformation, full of losses and achievements, shows the resilience of Islam in times of crisis. After the fragmentation of the Islamic world caused by the Mongol invasion and the fall of Baghdad in 1258, the era of the early modern period begins. Onto the stage of history step the three largest Islamic empires, the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal. They become the dominant powers from the 15th to the 19th century. These states turn not just into political giants, but into true cultural and religious laboratories. Here, Islam acquires new forms, intertwining with local traditions and the ambitions of rulers. Each empire interprets Islam in its own way. They create unique systems of law and governance, leave masterpieces of architecture and art, face the challenges of reform movements. Their histories are full of intrigue, luxury, and unexpected details that make this era captivating. Let us immerse ourselves in their world and examine each one in turn. The Ottoman Empire begins at the end of the 13th century, when Osman I, chief of a small Turkic tribe in northwestern Anatolia, begins to expand his domains. Its flourishing falls in the 15th century under Suleiman the Magnificent. This sultan is known in Europe as the Magnificent, and in the Islamic world as Kanuni, meaning the lawgiver, turning the empire into a superpower. It stretches from Hungary to the Persian Gulf, and from Algeria to the Caucasus. The Ottomans follow the Sunni madhab, one of the four legal schools, notable for its flexibility and pragmatism. For them, the Sultan is not only a secular ruler, but also a protector of the faith. In 1453, Mehmed the Conqueror renames Constantinople Istanbul and makes it his capital. The city becomes the heart of the Islamic world. In 1517, Selim I, nicknamed Yavuz, meaning the Grim, conquers Egypt. He overthrows the last Abbasids in Cairo and assumes the title of Caliph. This establishes the Ottoman sultans as leaders. Interestingly, this title was initially more a political maneuver to legitimize power over the Arab lands than a sincere religious calling, which provoked disputes among the ulama. The Ottoman system of governance combines Sharia with the Sultan's decrees, canons. They regulate taxes, military service, and even everyday matters such as the size of turbans. Thus, a flexible system of administration is created. A distinctive feature: the millets, religious communities, Christians, Jews, and other minorities manage their own courts and schools under the oversight of Istanbul. Ottoman culture is a vivid synthesis. They absorb Byzantine grandeur, Persian refinement, and Turkic simplicity. Poetry flourishes at the court. Fuzuli writes his divans in 3 languages: Turkish, Arabic, and Persian, praising love and mysticism. Architecture reaches its peak with the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul. It is built in the 1550s by the genius Sinan. Its 4 slender minarets and huge dome, inspired by Hagia Sophia, symbolize power. An interesting detail: Sinan, the son of a Greco-Christian, was recruited through the Devshirme system, in which boys from non-Muslim families were taken into the Janissaries. He designed more than 400 buildings, including bridges and palaces. Reform movements within the empire are diverse. The Bektashi order blends Sufism with folk beliefs. Later, in the 18th century, the Ottomans faced the Wahhabi challenge from Arabia, demanding a strict return to the origins. The Safavid Empire arises in Iran in 1511. Its founder, the young Ismail I, only 14 years old, proclaims himself Shah. He establishes Twelver Shi'ism, a radical step, distinguishing the Safavids from the Sunni Ottomans and Mughals. For them, Islam is a mystical journey. The 12 Imams, beginning with Ali, are considered infallible. Ismail asserts that he is a descendant of the 7th Imam Musa al-Kazim, and even hints to his followers at a messianic role. Turkic tribes in red turbans with 12 stripes in honor of the Imams see in him almost an incarnation of divinity. The Safavid state structure is a theocracy. The Shah, the shadow of God on earth, unites spiritual and secular power. Sharia here is stricter than among the Ottomans. Shiite ulama play a central role in administration. Safavid culture is imbued with Persian refinement. Shah Abbas I, ruling from 1588 to 1629, moves the capital to Isfahan. He turns it into the jewel of the empire. Naqsh-e-Jahan Square, with the Sheikh Lotfola Mosque covered with tiles and symmetry, shines. Art reaches its peak in the miniatures of Reza Abbasi, enlivened by fine lines and bright colors in scenes of hunting and feasts. A curious fact: Shah Ismail himself wrote poems under the pseudonym Khatai. He praised Ali and mystical love. His poetry is still popular among Azerbaijanis. Reformist ideas in Safavid Iran are tied to Shiite messianism, but Shah Abbas later moderates extremes, strengthening centralization. The Mongol, that is, Mughal, Empire in India begins in 1526. Babur, a descendant of Timur and Genghis Khan, wins the Battle of Panipat and founds the dynasty. Its flowering falls under Akbar from 1556 to 1605. The Mughals follow Sunni Islam, but Akbar pursues the policy of Sul-i-Kul, universal conciliation. He seeks to unite Muslims, Hindus, Jains, and even Christians. In religious debates at Fatehpur Sikri, he creates a syncretic image of the empire. The Mughals are a centralized monarchy with a developed bureaucracy. Sharia is applied gently, yielding to local customs and the Padishah's decrees. Mughal culture is a rich synthesis of Persian, Indian, and Central Asian. The Taj Mahal, built by Shah Jahan in 1632 for his wife Mumtaz, embodies the height of their architecture. Its white marble and symmetrical minarets radiate harmony. Art flourishes in miniatures, illustrating the Babur name, the memoirs of the founder. An interesting detail: many Padishahs, including Jahangir, wrote poetry. The son of Shah Jahan left verses about his love for Mumtaz. Babur described the nature of India with the lyricism of a traveler. Reform movements among the Mughals are rare, but Akbar faces resistance from the ulama. Later, Aurangzeb in 1658 returns to strict Islam, reinforcing Sharia. These 3 empires, each with its own soul, show how Islam adapts to the age. The Ottomans build the Sunni world. The Safavids raise Shi'ism to a mystical ideal. The Mughals seek harmony in diversity. Their differences in faith, culture, and administration create a rich mosaic. It still inspires and amazes. After the era of the great Islamic empires, the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal, there begins a turbulent and complex period of the 19th and 20th centuries, when the traditional world encounters waves of change generated by the Industrial Revolution, colonial expansion, and the ideas of the Enlightenment. This stage becomes a time of trials and of searching for new paths. European powers such as Britain, France, and Russia subjugate vast territories of the Islamic world from North Africa to South Asia, leaving Muslim societies facing the question how to preserve their faith and identity under foreign domination. In response, various currents arise: reformism, Islamism, modernism, each offering its own strategy of adaptation. We shall trace how Islam responded to these challenges, meet bright thinkers such as Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, Muhammad Iqbal, and Ali Shariati, and learn how the religion took root in Europe and the United States of America. Colonialism strikes the Islamic world in the 19th century with unprecedented force. By the beginning of the 20th century, Britain controls India and parts of the Arabian Peninsula. France seizes Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, and the Russian Empire subjugates Central Asia and the Caucasus. The Ottoman Empire, once a formidable superpower, by this time is weakened and nicknamed the Sick Man of Europe. In 1924, its last Caliph Abdul I is deposed. The caliphate is officially abolished, an event that shakes Muslims to their core. Colonization brings not only political oppression, but also cultural shock. Western ideas such as secularism, nationalism, and progress penetrate Muslim societies, forcing them to rethink their faith. Yet instead of passive acceptance, Islam responds with a wave of reform. Reformism becomes one of the first answers to the colonial challenge. Its pioneer is Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, born in 1838 in Iran, although he often presented himself as Afghan to unite Muslims of different regions. This charismatic thinker travels through India, Egypt, the Ottoman Empire, and even Europe. Through education and unity, he sees in Western science and technology a tool that Muslims must master to restore lost power. His famous phrase, "Islam is a religion of reason, not blind submission," reflects the aspiration to reconcile faith with modernity. Together with his student Muhammad Abdu, the Egyptian Mufti, he calls for the renewal of Sharia, asserting that Islam is originally flexible and capable of adaptation. Their ideas inspire a generation of reformers. Though al-Afghani remains an enigmatic figure, it is said he once debated European philosophers in Paris over coffee in a cafe, a bold cultural gesture for that time. Parallel to reformism arises Islamism, a current seeking salvation in a return to pure Islam. One of its vivid representatives is Hassan al-Banna, who founds in 1928 in Egypt the movement the Muslim Brothers. He believes that Western influence corrupts Muslims and calls for a society built exclusively on Sharia. His slogan, "The Quran is our constitution," sounds as a challenge to colonial authorities and secular elites. Islamists, unlike reformers, often reject modernization, seeing it as a threat to spiritual values. Yet their influence grows, especially among the poor, weary of foreign oppression. A curious fact, al-Banna was fond of clocks and even opened a workshop, symbolic of his idea to order Islamic society. Modernism offers another path, combining Islam with Western ideas. One of its leaders is Muhammad Iqbal, born in 1877 in Punjab, then part of British India. A poet, philosopher, and lawyer, he studies at Cambridge and Munich, absorbing European thought, yet remains a deeply faithful Muslim. Iqbal dreams of the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam, so he calls his book of 1930. His poems such as The Complaint, in which he addresses Allah, asking why Muslims have lost their former greatness, become an anthem of awakening. He writes, "The heart of a Muslim is a sword, his reason a shield." Iqbal inspires the creation of Pakistan, although he does not live to see its independence in 1947. It is astonishing that this modernist adored Nietzsche, but reinterpreted his ideas. Another powerful figure, Ali Shariati, the Iranian thinker, born in 1933, educated in Paris. He combines Shiite theology with Marxism, creating a revolutionary ideology. Shariati sees in Islam a tool for liberating the oppressed. He reinterprets the martyrdom of Imam Hussein at Karbala as a symbol of struggle against tyranny. His words, "Every day is Ashura, every place Karbala," inspire the Iranian Revolution of 1979. He dies in 1977 in exile, perhaps at the hands of the Shah's agents, but his lectures still stir minds. Interestingly, he loved to quote French existentialists such as Sartre in his sermons. Islam adapts to challenges not only through ideas, but also through geography. In Europe, it appears with migrants and converts. By the 20th century, mosques arise in London, Paris, Berlin. In 1933, the first mosque opens in Great Britain, in Woking, thanks to Indian Muslims. In the United States of America, Islam arrives with African slaves, many of whom secretly keep their faith. In the 20th century, the movement Nation of Islam, founded by Wallace Fard in 1930, attracts followers, although its teaching deviates from traditional Islam. Malcolm X, having embraced Orthodox Islam in 1964, becomes its bright voice. The first mosque in America appears in 1929 in Iowa, built by Syrian immigrants. Reflecting on this period, we see that colonialism fragments the Islamic world, but gives birth to thinkers who seek ways forward. Reformers like Al-Afghani see in it reason. Islamists like al-Banna call to the roots. Modernists such as Iqbal dream of synthesis, and Shariati turns it into revolution. In Europe and the United States of America, Islam adapts to modernity. Astonishingly, in 1952 in London, a beauty contest for Muslim women in hijabs takes place, a sign of how faith combines with modernity. Islam of the 19th and 20th centuries proves it is not frozen in the past, but continues to breathe, change, and amaze. From its inception, Islam has gone from a humble call in the Arabian desert to a world civilization embracing millions of people, dozens of cultures, and countless ideas. This is not merely the story of a religion, it is the story of people, their dreams, and their struggle. We have seen how Muhammad united tribes in Medina, how the Umayyads and Abbasids built empires, how the Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals created their unique worlds. We have observed how Islam survived crises, from the Mongol invasions to colonial oppression, and each time found the strength to be reborn, whether through Sufi ideas, the rationalism of the House of Wisdom, or the revolutionary fervor of Shariati. The history of the faith has been an anchor in the storms of time. Islamic civilization is not a monolith, but a living fabric woven of triumphs and tragedies, of the search for truth and the striving for justice. Let us recall a parable from the Sufi tradition. One day, a traveler asked a sage, "What is light?" The sage replied, "Light is what you see when the veil of time opens through the world." Islam, like this light, has always been an inner flame carried by people through the centuries, illuminating the path through art, science, and ethics. Today, in a world torn by conflicts and the search for meaning, Islam offers not only the richness of its culture, but also compassion for the weak, justice for neighbors, and a mindset that teaches one to see unity in diversity. Its history shows a civilization lives as long as its ideas and people willing to embody them live. And perhaps the main lesson of these 14 centuries is that within every crisis lies the seed of a new beginning, if there is the will to nurture it.